Welcome to another edition of the Public Interest. My name is David Granger, and on this series of programs, we examine issues of interest to Guyanese at home and in the diaspora. And those of you who've been listening to these programs would realize that for several months, I've been speaking with violence and violent death. And in our history, particularly recent history since the start of this century, one of the most significant causes of violent death has been narco trafficking. The former head of the presidential secretariat once described the troubles, the warfare that was taking place between 2000 and 2010 as drug gang warfare. And many people ignore that. Some people try to say it was racial, it was just criminality, it was just banditry. But he called it drug gang warfare. So Guyanese should realize that the killings that occurred between 2000 and 2010 under the PPP administration were the result of narco trafficking. And now that we are under the PPP administration once again, we realize that narco trafficking has resumed, and it is for us as citizens to look for the connection between narco trafficking and the high rate of murder in this country, and of course the economic distortion that is caused by narco trafficking. And what happened in March this year, we learned of the discovery by the Drug Enforcement Administration of the United States of another incident. But this reminds us of an incident 10 years ago in which it was discovered that there was something called the self-propelled semi-submersible vessel. It's called the SPSS. Well, many people just think it's a submarine, but it's not a real submarine. It's semi-submersible. It cannot perform at deep water like the submarine, but it can go on for short periods of time. And the first time we got any knowledge of this vessel or this type of vessel was 10 years ago under the PPP administration, 14th of August 2014. Remember the date, it's 10 years ago. And it was discovered, but it was actually assembled in Ghana in Region 1, what we call the Brima-Waini region. And, people seem to have forgotten that, and they don't even know what happened. They don't know who built it and why it was built. But, you can see photographs of it when you're ready. That was 10 years ago. But what happened in March is that there was another one, and this was offshore Guyana, heading out to the ocean, and the United States DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency, intercepted it with 2,370 kilograms of cocaine. And it was intercepted by a United States Navy guided missile cruiser. And so you can see what's happening. We are really in murky waters here, troubled waters. When you have this type of vessel sailing away towards the destinations in Europe or West Africa or where else. We must remember, my friends, that the drug gang warfare of the Troubles, the first decade of this century, were caused by narco trafficking. There's no doubt about that. And we shouldn't feel that drug warfare is something that we could live with. A few people get rich, but it is not so. It brings people bring in guns, people want territory, they bring in planes, and once the cocaine comes in, the cocaine have to get out to the lucrative markets. And once the PPP administration is in government, watch out. Because the only time we got a little respite, the only time we got a break from this type of drug gang warfare or narco trafficking was between 2015 and 2020, when the APNU was in office, and we introduced measures to curb the drug traffickers. But as soon as the APIU left, all hell broke loose, literally. So we had in government a clear strategy. We built new structures and we were bent on eradicating this crime. And what is happening now? Narco trafficking is surging again because the criminal on the world is rising to the response of demand. Economics, demand and supply. So once there's demand, somebody will provide the supply. And once the cocaine is coming into Guyana, it will find a way out. And Guyana's hinterland is unique. We know it's very beautiful, part of the Guyana Shield. But the hinterland, what we call the bush, makes up about 3/4 of our territory. And it is very lightly populated. You can say underpopulated. The settlements are scattered. There are about 200 indigenous villages. As you know, when APN was in government, we created 4 new towns, but still the population is still very low. And there's a very heavy influx of Venezuelan migrants, maybe about 30,000. There are more Venezuelans in the Northwest, Region 1, than there are Guyanese. But they're long borders, they're open spaces, and the present administration, the PPP administration, does not spend a lot of resources and attention to policing those areas. Look and see where they're building the roads. They're not building roads to look after border security or national security. They're building roads in Blackbush Polder. That's where the roads are going. They're building roads in the urban areas. But narco trafficking is not taking place in Blackbush Polder. It is taking place in the hinterland. Without roads, without policing. You listen to the police commissioner. He complains about not having resources, not having enough boats, not having enough aircraft, not having enough policemen on the ground to maintain security of the hinterland. But instead of providing the police with the resources, the police are being given blue polo shirts and being told to go and clean up Mandela Avenue. So the drug trafficking is taking place in the hinterland. The planes are landing in the hinterland. Stuff is coming across the border, and the police are cleaning the streets. So something is wrong. I don't know if I'm missing the plot here. So when we look at that, we must realize that there are serious problems in maintaining security of the hinterland. There are a lot of airstrips. Sometimes gold miners have built their own airstrip, but which cannot be monitored. There's rivers, and sometimes you can drive along a river for maybe an hour at a time, and you don't see anyone. The land borders, sometimes there's a river, sometimes there's bush, but it's difficult to control the hinterland. When I was president, I reintroduced mounted police because those are, you don't have to carry in fuel to feed the horses. The horses are there anyway. And this territory takes up about 3/4 of Guyana's land space. The border with Brazil alone is about 1,100 kilometers. The border with Suriname, with Venezuela, is not 800 kilometers. The border with Suriname, over 700 kilometers. So it's a lot of distance. Rivers, creeks, savanna, jungle. And nobody's looking at that. People are looking at roads for Blackbush Polder. People are looking at black plastic bags and black plastic tanks, and they're not paying attention to the overall security of the country. Now, this situation of narco trafficking is nothing new, and it was noticed since the 1990s. As you know, the People's National Congress government was in office until 1992, and that government had built I would say the architecture was in place. There was something called the National Drug Law Enforcement Committee, and there was a policy which had been promulgated to curb drug trafficking in Guyana. But from the time the PPP took that entered government, there were problems. For example, those of you who follow this type of narrative would know that as early as 1998, when the PPP was in government, uh, a ship called the MV Danielson was boarded and searched in Demerara Harbor. 3,000 kilos of cocaine. Then again, you had in February 2014, the cocaine smugglers from Guyana were tied up with the Gambino mafia family and Italy's Drangheta family, and they had to be dismantled. Guyanese drug traffickers were tied up with the Gambino mafia family. This is not, a matter of distributing a few grams of cocaine around the streets. This is international trafficking. And I suppose the traffickers had to find a way to get the cocaine into the country in the first place, and then out of the country to places in Italy. So you can hear about that because when when the APNU left office in 2020, by by the very year, um, 1.5 tons, that's metric tons of cocaine, was found in a container in Hamburg, in Germany. A container coming from Guyana with rice, and 1.5 tons of cocaine, and that was detected. You don't know how much has passed undetected, but that much was detected. In November the same year, well, when the PPP administration had already entered office, another container was found with 11.5 tons of cocaine. This is serious. Guyana doesn't produce coca. It means cocaine came in and they had to get the cocaine out. So some people are getting very rich, and Guyana is getting a very, very bad name. And this was picked up in Antwerp, in Belgium. Can you imagine moving that volume of cocaine from Guyana? You're not talking about rice, you're not talking about sugar, you're not talking about mangoes, you're not talking about sweet potatoes, you're talking about cocaine. 1.5 tons, 11.5 tons. These are the numbers you're looking at in Antwerp, in Belgium. And then there was another one which turned up in Rotterdam, in the Netherlands. So our cocaine, our national narcotics trafficking uh, corporations or cartels, whatever they're called, have an immense global reach, and people are becoming immensely rich. By they're moving cocaine by air, they're moving it by sea, and they're moving it on land. Even after APNU left office, 5 foreign aircraft are known are known to have landed illegally since August 2020. In September 2020, a plane landed at Isano. In May 2021, a plane landed at Oriala. When I say landed, I mean they crash landed because they probably had fault, because they didn't bring cocaine for people in Oriala. They bring the cocaine for people in Isano. Then at Bisaruni, in June 2021, another airplane was found. Then in Mahdia, in November 2021, another airplane was found. Then in Kuruduni, in 2022, another airplane was found. In Mahdia airstrip, in 2022, another airplane was found. My friends, this is what is happening to your country. People are bringing cocaine, and we only discover these aircraft when they have crashed, when they've run out of fuel, or when there's a problem. So we don't know, as I speak here, how many planes are landing and taking off undetected, and how much cocaine is being brought in the country. And once it comes into the country, it will be taken out. Guyana is becoming a transit point for cocaine trafficking. And we don't seem to have the capability to prevent this trafficking. In this hemisphere, the United States has very powerful and far-reaching intelligence services and systems. And every year they publish something called the International Narcotics Control Strategy Report, INCSR for short. The United States Department of State publishes that. And 10 years ago, or even longer, they were reporting that Guyana is a transit point. Guyana is a transit point for narcotics to destinations in the European Union, in the United Kingdom, and United States. And the International Narcotics Report mentioned that unpoliced borders, remember what I told you a minute ago, the police are cleaning Mandela Avenue. So they're not looking at the borders. But the United States is saying that the unpoliced borders allow illegal narcotics to enter the country by air, road, and river. And then petty couriers with small amounts of narcotics are frequently arrested. But the big traffickers, the people moving a ton of cocaine in these huge containers, somehow or the other, they never get arrested. You know, there was a West African proverb that, you know, the law is like a net which catches mosquitoes but allows the eagles to fly through. You know, it sounds crazy, but that seems to be happening in the narco world in Guyana. So we see what is happening. Another narcotics control strategy report from the United States mentioned that the government was unable to control corruption in the Guyana police force. That is the PPP government. In 2021, when the PPP was in government again, the report mentioned drug traffickers are attracted to Guyana because of its poorly monitored ports. So the American DEA knows that drug traffickers are attracted to Guyana because of poorly monitored ports, remote airstrips, and intricate river network and porous land borders, as well as corruption and an under-resourced, under-financed, under-equipped security sector. These are not my opinions. These are the reports from the United States Department of State. And we must expect that as the country becomes theoretically richer as a result of petroleum production, the drug traffickers will continue to come to exploit our poorly monitored ports, our porous borders, and our corrupt system of enforcement. My friends, the question of narco trafficking in Guyana has a long history. And even when I was in office, not as president, but as a military officer, I sat on something called the National Drug Law Enforcement Committee, NADLEC, NADLEC, chaired by the President Desmond Hoyt himself. And we launched a strategy for dealing with the drug problem. And also there was a committee called the National Drug Law Enforcement Committee, which I mentioned. And the Joint National Anti-Narcotics Committee, JANOC, was established. And there's also a Joint Intelligence Coordinating Center, GICC. All of these things, there was an architecture, there was a framework to deal with the drug problem and to deal with the international community to prevent the type of criminality which we see taking place again in Guyana. But the PPP entered in office into government in 1992. They inherited the architecture, they inherited the National Drug Law Enforcement Committee, they inherited a strategy for dealing with the drug problem, but they threw it out of the window. And what we see happening is that once that was done, we started to see a rise again in narco trafficking. And they launched their own national drug strategy master plan, but it was never enforced. It was under a minister who was a former military officer who was cashiered from the GDF. And he is the first Minister of Home Affairs to appear before a commission inquiry to determine whether he was actually managing a death squad. Well, he's no longer with us. And They established a National Anti-Narcotics Commission, which does not meet. So all of the plans were shelved. Unsurprisingly, narcotics trafficking started to flourish again. Fortunately for the Guyanese people, fortunately for the nation, unfortunately for the criminals, APNU entered office under my presidency in 2015. And we established a national anti-narcotics agency, which, and of course, as soon as the PPP got in 2020, they disbanded it. We launched a national drug strategy master plan, and we were able to control narco trafficking. Just look at the record. We had a balanced plan, we had a comprehensive plan, and we dealt with narco trafficking on a national scale, not just here and there. But we had a plan, and unfortunately, we left office, and that plan was abandoned. My friends, the question of narco trafficking is very important to us in Guyana, because if you look around the world, look at Ecuador, look at the countries of Central America, and you will see that sometimes even presidents are being prosecuted for being involved in narco trafficking. We have signed a lot of agreements. We have agreements where we are signatories to the United Nations Convention against illicit traffic in narcotics, drugs, and psychotropic substances. We are signatories to the United Nations Convention against transnational organized crime. And you can see when people are shipping tons of cocaine, it is a question of organized crime. You don't see this in Barbados. You don't see this in St. Vincent or St. Lucia or St. Kitts Nevis. But Guyana is a transit point. We are signatories to the Inter-American Drug Abuse Control Commission, CICAD. And we've signed agreements with Suriname, we've signed agreements with Colombia, we've signed agreements with Venezuela. But the agreements don't enforce themselves. The agreements are just pieces of paper unless you have a government, unless you have ministers with the political will to bring drug trafficking to a halt. And if you see drug trafficking continue, it means that the resources are not being provided, and it means that the law enforcement operators are not enforcing the law. Where do we go from here? Do you want to live in a narco state? Do you want people pointing the fingers at you? Do you want your citizens to be involved with the Italian mafia? Do you want your shipments of rice to turn up at Hamburg and Antwerp and Rotterdam with tons of cocaine? What sort of country do you want to live in? What sort of country do you want your children to grow up in? A drug trafficking country or an orderly, law-abiding country where everybody has a place, a role to play, and there's no rich upper class of drug lords causing havoc, bringing guns into the country, shooting and killing, executions, enforcement of their drug control over their drug territory? Or do you want a safe society where your children can grow up? That is the big question. If it's something that bothers you, ask yourself, why is the PPP so reluctant to deploy the police force on the borders? Why is it so reluctant to watch these hinterland airstrips and control our airspace? Why is it so difficult to monitor our rivers? Why deploy our policemen to clean up Mandela Avenue? These men on a mission wearing blue shirts, when in fact they should be in green, protecting our hinterland communities in Baramita and Kaikan and Whitewater from these syndicatos and other drug traffickers. We cannot abandon 3/4 of our country to narco traffickers. But believe me, narco trafficking will continue unless and until we have the political will to enforce the laws and abide by the agreements which we have signed with neighboring countries, with the United Nations to bring narco trafficking to hell. Narco trafficking always brings death. And if you look at what is happening in countries of Central America, from Mexico right down to Ecuador, you'll see that there's nothing good about narco trafficking, particularly cocaine trafficking. And we want to live in a safe society. We want to live in a secure society. And we call on the government of Guyana to seriously deal with this narcotics problem. The discovery of a semi-submersible submarine, well, it's not a submarine, it's a semi-submersible vessel, in March with 2,300 kilos of cocaine is nothing to be proud of. We should be thinking of exporting, sweet potatoes and breadfruit and sugar, but we cannot allow our country to degenerate into a narco state. I warn you, we saw this before in the Troubles when the drug lords were driving around shooting and killing. We can't go back there. We have to put an end to narco trafficking. And this is a responsibility not just of the United States Department of State, not just of the Drug Enforcement Agency, but every Guyanese mother must think about her son or her daughter, try to protect our society from the perils of narco trafficking. Guyana needs the type of National Anti-Narcotics Agency that the APNU created. Guyana needs a National Drug Strategy Master Plan that the APNU enforce. Guyana needs a Ministry of Public Security which knows the importance of keeping citizens safe from the violence of narco trafficking. May God bless your sons and daughters and keep this country safe from drug trafficking.
Let us cooperate for the young. Let us cooperate for our land. Let us resolve to fight together. See we do it right together. Can we do it? Yes, we can.